ओम नमः श्री यतिराजाय विवेकानंद सूरये सच्चित सुख स्वरूपाय स्वामिने तापहारिणे. So we were discussing the sutra number 15 of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. The sutra reads like this: दृष्टानुश्राविक विषय वितृष्णस्य वशीकार संज्ञा vairagyam. So last time, if you remember, we discussed what abhyasa is. Abhyasa means repeated practice. We defined it as satu dirgha kala nairantarya satkara sevito dhrida bhumi. Means any practice becomes firmly grounded by dirgha kala, by long and constant efforts. Long efforts for a length of time, for a long period of time. Nairantarya means without any antara, without any gap. Whenever you get a chance, you can reduce the gap. If not, there will be gaps between your practices, but whenever you get a chance, you try to uh, practice it. So that is abhyasa. That is the definition. Patanjali, when he says abhyasa and vairagya, when you put together, you reach the goal. Now, the continuous struggle, Dhrida Bhumi results in creating an environment when your yoga becomes perfect. The process of yoga which you are doing, the chitta vritti nirodha which you are supposed to attain, becomes firmly grounded when you practice for a long time. That is, satu dirgha kala nairantarya satkara sevita, means loving that practice. That is the main essence of yoga, that one should love what one is doing. Just as when you are training to become a sportsman or something like that. So you need to practice some kind of sport. Unless you love that sport, unless you love that practice, every day it is a very big strain to go on practicing for a long period of time. But if really one really loves to become a master sportsman or a master dancer or a master singer, then he has to practice. There's no way one can avoid this. So abhyasa one understands, but why vairagya? Is this abhyasa and vairagya only for yoga? Yes, because without vairagya, some kind of vairagya, even worldly achievements like music. What do you mean by vairagya? Suppose one has to learn music, then he has to give up certain other pursuits which will deter him from practicing. Whatever deters him from abhyasa will result in some kind of vairagya. So one does not have to be unnecessarily bothered or concerned about what this vairagya is. When you have abhyasa, automatically vairagya comes in its wake. If you when we studied grammar, there is a grammar of Sanskrit which is very difficult, which is Patanjali has written a commentary on that. It is uh, Panini's grammar. Panini has written a wonderful grammar, Ashtadhyayi. So they say, Ashtadhyayi, if you insist on studying, the Panditji will tell us you have to stop studying everything else. I mean, it's a kind of vairagya. You can't study geography, you can't study history. When you study Patanjali, when you study Panini's Ashtadhyayi, the grammarians are very particular because it's such an intricate subject. It requires a long abhyasa. Abhyasa means dirgha kala, for a long time, constant effort, nairantarya, satkara sevita. Satkara sevita means with great love. You should have love for grammar. If you want to study grammar, you should have love for the sport in which you want to practice. You don't practice unless you really love it. So that makes you get up early in the morning, go for practice for hours together. So when you do that, you don't understand that unconsciously you are practicing vairagya at the same time. Abhyasa cannot go without vairagya. If you have vairagya, now what that vairagya is, we have to understand. Even after defining abhyasa, Patanjali is trying to describe what Vairagya is. Drishtanu Shravika. Drishta means that which comes, that which is seen, either seen or heard. See, there are two ways. We see certain things, or we hear from other people about somebody says, "Oh, France is a beautiful country. One should go and visit." You might not have seen France. You might not have even watched a movie or some video about France, or you might have seen it. So that is drishta. Anushravika, drushtanu shravika. Shravika, anushravika means heard from somebody else. Somebody goes to France, he comes back and says it is such a wonderful place, you should visit. So that either that which is that effect which comes to those people who have given up the thirst after objects, either seen or heard. Either you have seen it or you have heard about it. So you don't bother about it and you don't run after it. If it comes to you, you just in a very detached way, you experience it and have your own conclusions about it, but you don't unnecessarily thirst after that. So that is vairagya. So don't you thirst after only the object of your abhyasa. Suppose your abhyasa is to become an excellent scientist, then science becomes your abhyasa, and anything other than seen or heard other than science, when you give up, you call it vairagya. So this is the most gross understanding of vairagya. But in yoga, it means something very high. It means less and less concern or botheration because of the gross or the even the subtle, and trying to dive into the recesses of the mind. The As I told you, there are two types of mind. One is the manas, reactive mind, another is the buddhi, the higher mind. So one vairagya means siding with the higher mind and not allowing the reactive mind to control you. You control the reactive mind, but don't allow the reactive mind to control you. What do you mean by allowing the reactive mind to control you? It simply means the gross things around you or the subtle things around you, some words uttered, something which you hear, shravika, drishta, anushravika, that which is seen or heard. Somebody says something which you know is untrue, but it hurts you. And immediately the reactive mind takes vrittis. And you find the vrittis difficult to control. You say, I have not done this. Why is he blaming me? But you know, those words have no effect if you detach yourself from the reactive mind. And Buddhi says, oh, this person is a fool. You don't have to take his words seriously. He may just be saying something out of ignorance. Why should I lose my head over it? So that means you are distancing, that is vairagya, distancing yourself from either heard or seen things. That which, that thirst to always gossip. Now, gossip is also heard. You are hearing something, and that gossip may be true or may not be true. Some gossip will hurt you, some gossip will elate you. Maybe it will elate you, but most of the time, gossip is always about negative things. So, because people don't gossip normally, then it is satsang. If you are gossiping about higher things, then it is not a gossip anymore. It is a satsang. But gossip is always about others' faults, others' negative things about life. So, what happens when you gossip? Anushravika, you hear. And if you have that taste, there are some people who cannot live without gossip. If they are alone, if somebody says you just sit quietly, that's why Latu Maharaj, once he said, Thakur is to tell me that it's better to go and sleep rather than go and gossip. It's sleeping is of course tamasic, but he says still it is better than gossip because gossip can drag you down further. So anushravika, that which is heard, also that which you see is definitely disturbing, but that which you hear also, whether it is true or not, whether it is based on truth or falsehood, the heard thing also can create vrittis. So that thirst after, so people when they want to keep quiet or when they feel that they are lonely, they are thirsting. They don't mind if a person comes and gossips. They don't realize that it would have been better if he were left to himself. rather than gossip with 2 3 people who they just come and have no purpose other than gossip. They will just tell certain things and that will agitate the mind and then they will go away. They have put some vibrations, negative vibes around you, and you fight with your reactive mind. They are no more, but their sound has created that negative vibe, and the sound has created those vibrations and they give rise to further vibrations. The reactive mind is always like that. It starts with one, you drop one stone in the lake, the ripple gives rise to another ripple, that ripple gives rise to another ripple. So a successive ripples creates these vrittis. And then you find it difficult to put a stop to it. Then you try all sorts of methods. You say, my mind is restless, I want to stop it, I want meditation, I want to do this, I want to do that. But you can't do it because the vrittis are so numerous, and the reactive mind is not under your control. The reactive mind is controlling you rather than you controlling the reactive mind. Now, how to control this reactive mind is what Patanjali says in this 15th Sutra. It is only through Vairagya. First of all, stop the input for some time. So, as I told you, Thakur used to say, go to Nirjan Vas, have holy company, Nirjan Vas, holy company. Third is Nitya Nitya Vastu Viveka. Try to discriminate between eternal and the temporary. And finally, take the name of the Lord. That is, do japa. If you can't do any discrimination, then do japa. That is also fine, because that is as good as creating positive vrittis which can subdue our negative vrittis. So Vairagya is just not the end in itself. Vairagya is the means to Abhyasa. So when you have Abhyasa in the 13th verse, Abhyasa was explained. Abhyasa and Vairagya both are necessary, it was told. But 14th verse he says, what is Vairagya? What is Abhyasa? And 15th verse says, Drishtanu Shravika Vishaya Vitrishnasya Vashikara Sanya Vairagyam. And which wills to control the objects. You see, the thing here, it's a very subtle truth you have to understand. Objects should not control you. You should control or develop the will to control the object. Say, the object says, I am tasty, you eat me. And you tell the will, that is Vairagya. You tell the will, I have seen the object, I have tasted it before, and somebody has told me it is good, but still I will not eat it now. I will eat it. I will decide when to eat. Just because it is in front of me, because it's not my dinner time or it is not my lunch time, I will not eat it. I know it is harmful to eat whenever you see an object, you feel tempted, then that means you are not in control of your mind. Drushtanu Shravika. Somebody has told you something about that object and you see that object and immediately you feel like buying it. Don't even have any kind of self-control. So that is the Vairagya. Now, Swamiji explains further. He says there are two motive powers which influence all our actions, good or bad. First is what we see ourselves, Drushta, and the experience of others, Anushravika. These through two forces, we can classify all our reactions. Reactive mind is comprised of either what we see ourselves and what we experience, what we understand from the experience of others. These two are enough to create the lake of the mind into waves. Renunciation is nothing, Vairagya is nothing but power of battling against those forces and holding the mind in check. So one does not have to, one can easily understand why Vairagya is important. It's just a process by which you battle the forces of the reactive mind and hold it in check and then decide what you should do or what you should not do by using your power of will, not by using the impulse generated by the reactive mind. If the impulse generated by the reactive mind weakens your will and you have no willpower to do as you wish, rather you do as the objects wish or the people who tell you, you are reacting to that, and you then indirectly you are under the slavery of those people. You are not free. So working or reacting out of free will is possible only if you have developed a little vairagya. And to support that, you should have abhyasa. So the renunciation, this vairagya is what we want. Now, Swamiji gives a wonderful example. I'll take that example because here Swamiji is trying to explain the importance of abhyasa and vairagya, how it helps us in our day to day life, how it influences our every action, our every moment. This abhyasa and vairagya is necessary. Swamiji says, I am passing through a street and a man comes and takes away my watch, any robber. That is my own experience now. I don't need somebody to tell me that this place is dangerous, you have to be careful. Maybe I've heard, but before or even if I have not heard, the experience is enough to convince me that this was not the right place to come with the expensive watch. So I see it myself and immediately I get angry because I was helpless to protect my own watch. Somebody came and took away my precious possession and I got angry. Now, the thing is, the watch has gone. So there is nothing you can do now. It has gone and there is very little chance that you will get it back. But what can you prevent? 50% of the action has been done. So the rest of the 50% is in your hand. Swamiji says, you can get angry. You can get angry, but that anger is not going to solve your problem. The person has already left. That anger is not going to give you your watch back. So that reaction, that 50% of the reactive force which you are generating and wasting your energy resources, first of all, you should have been cautious not to wear that expensive watch where there is loneliness. Now we have done some foolishness, and now what is the point? To add anger, and then that will be adding more misery to ourselves. We get angry, we go on fuming, fretting. This should not have happened, this should not have happened. Why did he come and take? Why me alone? There were so many other people, he could have robbed them. Why me? What is then we blame karma, then we blame God, then we blame so many people. And then that anger, if you don't allow, because that is only under your control. The external 50% was not under your control. The robber had to come, but that is karma, some karma, but that is only 50%. His taking away the watch was 50%. But what about your 50%? If you contribute that, your misery becomes totally complete. So if you don't allow that 50%, if you can prevent that, or if you cannot prevent that, you are nothing. If you can prevent that reaction, and the reactive mind making you more miserable, if you can do that, that means you have vairagya. So that is how vairagya helps us in our day-to-day life. Again, the experience of the worldly minded. Now, there are so many people around us, and the majority of them do not even care a little bit for vairagya. They said, as long as we have this body, let us enjoy, and we'll not bother about the consequences right now. So, the experience of the worldly minded teaches every person that sense enjoyments are the highest ideal. Now, this is what you are seeing. It's drushta, it's not heard. Nobody comes and tells you that these things are good. Maybe they come and tell you, but many things you are seeing with your own eyes. The moment you come out to the street, you will see so many people enjoying in so many ways. You don't need to read books or somebody to tell you that these things are there. Many things you are see. And Swamiji says these are tremendous temptations. To deny them and not allow the mind to come to a wave form with regard to them is renunciation. Now, what is in your hand? You can't prevent them to do as they like. Neither can you blame them, nor can you stop them, and it is not necessary. What is necessary is not to allow your own mind, that 50%, that reactive capacity has to be restrained, reactive capacity has to be controlled properly, and you'll have to decide that I am not going to follow the crowd, I am not going to follow. If it is really good for me, if something I can get on a permanent basis, not on a temporary basis, then I'll go for it. Otherwise, I don't need it. So that is how vairagya is to be practiced. to control the twofold motive powers arising from my own experience or from the experience of others. See, it is not just your experience. You might not have seen anything, but somebody comes and constantly tells you, gives his experience and tries to convince you, Arey, why don't you come? Why don't you smoke? Come, you have not, you don't know. In the beginning, it may be difficult, but later on, you'll enjoy this smoke. So he is telling from his experience and goes on pestering you, and you either succumb to pressure or you yourself see the cigarette and then you smoke, and after 4 or 5 smokes then you can't give it up. So they are controlling you, the objects are controlling you, or the people who smoke are controlling you. So in both cases, drishta anushravika are the principal motives. So by preventing the chitta from being governed by them, your chitta is the mind stuff. So if you prevent it from assuming the shape of the reactive mind, but allow the chitta to use its buddhi, the higher mind, and then decide what is good, what is not good from your own experience, from the experience of others. You see some people enjoying certain things and then you see them suffer also. It's not that you see them only enjoying. And then you have to weigh in your mind. They had enjoyment, but then the suffering they had after maybe enjoying for a moment was more than what they enjoyed. So that buddhi will now decide. See, this is the pros and cons. Everything we have to evaluate that way. This was temporary, but the problem he is now facing is eternal. So we do not realize what is the whether the joy is temporary and the problems which result from that are more less temporary. I mean, they are more permanent. I mean, they may not be eternal, but they are definitely longer lasting than the joy you got. So you have to weigh the uh, relative merits and demerits. You have to weigh it in your mind. That only buddhi can do. Reactive mind will say, just eat, don't bother. You see a rasgulla, just eat. Then when the sugar spikes and so many other things happen, then you think, oh, I should not have taken it. So that way, every experience, whether it is seen by me or experienced by me or somebody told me, if I follow it without weighing the consequences, then the chitta, then thus preventing the chitta from being governed by them is vairagya. So vairagya helps you use your buddhi and not allow the chitta to become one with the manas, but rather chitta assumes the form of the buddhi, and that buddhi saves you. So Swamiji says these chitta, these waves should be controlled by me. I should decide what waves should come to my mind and not I by them. This sort of mental strength. Now this requires strength. Why does Swamiji talk, when he talks of mental strength, what strength does he mean? It means willpower. So stronger the will, the more strong the stronger the mind you have. So the definition of strength, mental strength, is the strength of the willpower. If the willpower is strong, then the mind is strong, and if the mind is strong, the willpower is strong. So, and then Swamiji adds something very important. Vairagya is the only way to freedom. Everybody wants to be free. Free from what? He wants to be free. But freedom is such a misunderstood word that people want freedom to do as they like. Okay, you eat as you like, but then you have to bear the consequences. So that is not freedom. The freedom is in Vairagya. Vairagya alone will give you freedom because it will give the control of your life in your own hands, in your own chitta will decide what will make you happy for a longer time and what will make you unhappy for a longer time. So that nobody can do. I mean, your mind alone will teach you based on, of course, if you have satsanga, if you hear it from others, you may have the advantage of deciding in a better way. But if you don't have any idea at all, you do not know what is good for you, what is bad for you. That means you don't have the chitta. Chitta is not your friend. The higher faculty of discrimination is not your friend. That is why Bhagavad Gita says, mind is your own friend, the mind can be your enemy. When the mind takes the form of manas, it is your enemy. When the mind takes the form of buddhi, when the chitta takes the form of buddhi, it is your friend. When the chitta takes the form of the manas or the reactive mind, it is your enemy. So Swamiji says this mental strength comes only from Vairagya, and Vairagya is the only way for freedom. So this definition of freedom one has to understand properly, because without this we think we are free. We are free means we just give, we keep our, we allow the reactive mind to have a free play, and we temporarily think it is freedom. But unfortunately, that reactive mind, if you give it a little freedom, if you don't allow the willpower to control it, then, or if you don't have the strength to control it, then you will find that that reactive mind will make you dance like a monkey. So Swamiji used to give the example of a monkey. First of all, the monkey is restless, and our reactive mind is like that. Then he says the monkey is given a little wine. So the restless monkey becomes more restless. It starts jumping. And then then Swamiji says a scorpion bites it. So that sting of the scorpion creates more restlessness. Already the wine has created a kind of, it has made the monkey tipsy, more tipsy. And then the scorpion bite has aggravated it. Then it starts jumping all over the place. So he says, Swamiji says, the mind is like that. And then finally he says the ghost comes and possesses the monkey. So ghost possession means that is still worse. So what are these three things? First is the uh, wine of desire. So monkey is our mind. Monkey has been compared to our mind. The wine is the wine of desire. So first the desires come. Wine is okay within limits. If you satisfy your desires, it's fine. But if the desires wine becomes more, then you become more and more restless. Then what is the scorpion? The scorpion is jealousy. So you have your own desires, and then you have jealousy. You see somebody and feel that, oh, that person has got a bigger house, I don't have a bigger house. So jealousy comes, and then you become more restless. So already the desire has made you restless, the wine has made you restless. The scorpion's bite, which is like the jealousy or envy, creates more restlessness. And finally, Swamiji says the demon comes and possesses that monkey. So the demon is ego. So ahankara. So ahankara does not allow the mind to be calm, because anything happens, he has to react. The ego says you react, you fight. So you not only have desires, you not only have jealousy, but you act upon that, and you go on trying very hard to get those things. Anything that you desire and you see others have it, you don't have it, you run after it. And that three things put together, according to Swamiji, is like a monkey drunk, who has drunk wine and bitten by the scorpion. And finally, the ghost has possessed, and then you can imagine what will be the condition of that monkey. So that is how our reactive mind behaves. So to control that reactive mind is like controlling the monkey. So that is the way of vairagya. That is what vairagya aims to do, to get your mental strength back and increase your willpower, and through that increased willpower you get a little taste of real freedom. So that is the freedom we seek, not freedom from the senses, freedom of the senses, freedom from the senses, freedom, not freedom of the senses, sorry. Freedom of the senses means allow the senses to run after objects, or run after certain words which make you go towards those objects. That is freedom of the senses. But freedom from the senses, you are free. Senses may give you whatever input the senses want, they can give. But then you uh, tell them, you just tell the mind that these things are not to be sought. You don't compete with others because of your jealousy or envy. Don't compete with others. If that person has, I should also have, and make your mind over restless. So the choice is ours whether we want freedom. If we want freedom, then we have to have vairagya and also practice abhyasa. Now we come to another important sutra. Tat param purusha khater guna vaitrishnyam. Now this is a purusha khyati. Means if you want still higher freedom, that is if you want to become one with the purusha, this vairagya is a lower vairagya which keeps the mind calm and quiet. But calm and quiet mind is not the goal. Remember, one has to remember calm, and to make the mind calm and quiet. Okay, how long? Again, it will uh, start reacting. So when you are happy, when you are in holy company, when you are doing japa, when you are doing abhyasa, you feel, oh, such a wonderful, calm nature I have attained. But that is not the goal. It appears now I am totally free. I have no worries, I have no anxieties. But how long will it continue? And will it be permanent? If when will it be permanent is explained in the 16th sutra. Tat parash tat param purusha khyater guna vaitrishna. That is extreme non-attachment. Now earlier it was ordinary non-attachment, which was the basic minimum without which you can't even dream of freedom. Even smaller freedom you can't have, leave alone the goal of attaining to purusha. But extreme non-attachment can help you to attain that, which gives up even the qualities which come from the knowledge of the real nature of purusha. Now what are these qualities? Guna vaitrishnam. You even give up the three gunas, not just give up the desires. The higher renunciation tells us you have to evaluate in your mind what are the three different gunas which are creating havoc in our life. There is tamas, there is rajas, and there is sattva. All the three are equally capable. Of course, sattva is less binding, rajas is a little more binding, and tamas is the worst. It's the worst bondage. You become very, very gross. As you go from annamaya kosha to pranamaya to manomaya, you go from sattva, you go from tamas to rajas, and rajas makes you intensely active, but still it is a disturbed state of mind. And when you become sattvic, it appears as if it is like tamas. Tamas and sattva are in appearance, externally it appears the same, but mentally it is totally different. Mentally you will be having intense joy and bliss, whereas a tamasic person is quiet, but will because he is lazy, not because he is peaceful, because he is extremely lazy even to become rajasic. So tamas is not the goal, but anyway, all the three gunas have to be transcended. Transcended. So it says guna vaitrishnam. You have to develop a distaste, have some non-attachment. Guna vaitrishnya. Trishna means thirst. So to give up the thirst to enjoy the positive or negative side of gunas. Normally the gunas take you down. So you may say it is negative. But to prevent that or to stop that, that is known as uh, Purusha Khyati. Purusha Khyati means comes from the real knowledge of Purusha. Khyati means actually it is a mental wave. So when you are repeating the name of God, you are trying to imagine that Purusha has become that God. He is the supreme. And every time you repeat the mantra or do some prayer, in fact, you are trying to create a vritti, a wave, which is known as Purusha Khyati. Tat Param Purusha Khyati. Param means the supreme Purusha. You try to create a wave based on that Purusha, and that wave will drown all the smaller waves which are giving you trouble. There are a lot of small vrittis which are hell bent on creating havoc in our life. They don't allow you peace of mind. They will never allow any kind of relaxation. One desire goes, another comes, another problem comes, another jealous wave comes, one wave of jealousy. You see a car, oh, I want that. You see another house, oh, I want that. And that you don't have a control. When you go on and on and on, there are innumerable objects. You see certain things which you perhaps really don't need. You already have a house, but you want a bigger house. You, there are certain things which are basic necessities. That is not Trishna. That is, for example, have a if you are hungry, eating food is not Trishna. It is a basic necessity to survive. And you are feeding the annamaya kosha and pranamaya kosha. But overfeeding, then the prana gets disturbed. So within limits, whatever you do, that is not succumbing to the desires. You're not doing just because your relative or your some friend is telling you to eat. Maybe he can inspire you, but you are eating only when you are hungry. Otherwise, if you just eat because your friend tells you to eat, then there are so many people who do that and then come to then suffer. So having a control over what I should eat and when I should eat, and whether I should be influenced by others or eat because somebody else eats. Somebody wants to show that I eat from this particular restaurant or which is very costly, the most expensive in the town. So then you also compete and you say, no, whether you want it or not, it's envy forcing you or jealousy forcing you. Said, I also have to be seen there eating in that place. So with great difficulty, you just go on and have your wish fulfilled because you realize that people will think, oh, this person is eating in this particular restaurant. So these are the things which cause the vrittis to increase. So if we just analyze at the end of the day, how many times we have succumbed to these three gunas which are influencing the reactive mind. The reactive mind, you remember, none of the layers, Annamaya Kosha, Pranamaya Kosha, Manomaya Kosha, Vijnanamaya Kosha also are free from gunas. But the higher you go, the more sattva, the proportion of sattva, if it increases, you go higher. So if we suppose see creation, come to the Prakriti's basic building block, come to the cell. There are animals, there are plants, there are stones, which can be called as tamasic. You go a little higher and you see plants. There's so much of life in that. Every leaf is different, unique. It has so many millions of cells, even a small leaf. And it such beautiful to look at the flowers. They do their functions with so much of precision. They seem to be so active. Prakriti is so active in them. So what is the guna there? Definitely it is not tamas. Tamas would have been more or less like stone. There is a little bit of a rajas. Rajas has now that guna is dominating in the plant and it says, no, let the weather try to kill me, but I am going to survive even the winter. And even though in winter all the leaves fall, the tree somehow has the resilience, it has the rajas. It says, no, no, I can't be converted into a log of wood. I will produce the greenery. All the leaves will come when the summer comes, when the spring comes. You will find all the wonderful leaves. Where were they? They were there. They were in tamasic form. But a rajas has slowly come. The rajoguna, when the predominance is there, at the prana level, the prana of the tree makes it bloom, makes the leaves come out. And then you see the hidden vigor, which had become tamasic for some time, has become rajasic. So also when you come to animals, you will find that they live on a slightly higher plane. Trees and plants and all these things, shrubs, flowers, they have a limited freedom. They are more bound. They are bound by the soil. They can't move wherever they like. They can move in the wind. They can move towards the sun. Even that much intelligence it has got. They can absorb the chlorophyll and then The leaves can help the tree to grow. The branches also grow. They can do all those things, but stationary. They are stationary. The restriction of movement. So the rajas is less. But if we go to animal kingdom, we will find that there is more of rajas than tamas, and depends on the animal. There may be a lazy sloth bear, or it may be a lion. So you may say the lion has more rajas than the sloth bear. It is more tamasic. It prefers to just hibernate. But if you see, the higher the animal, the more the prana, it lives more at the pranic level. The prana is so strong that the limitations of the body are overcome. The deer, for example, it can run very fast when enemies come. So the survival rate, the survival of the fittest, as they say, the animal comes with the advantage of having more of higher gunas, that is more of rajas. Then you see, you come to the human being. Many of them are at the very rudimentary level using their manas, just as the lion, when it feels hungry, it eats. When it wants to procreate, it will mate. It will give rise to children. So that is something which we inherit from animals. So we're not doing a great service to humanity by just doing what the animals do. God has created us with a little bit of sattva if we use it. If we decide to use it, then our uniqueness is in using more and more of sattva. That is the advantage Prakriti has given us. Prakriti says you can choose to use tamas, you can choose to use rajas, and just be satisfied at the animal level. Prakriti doesn't force, but it is our own willpower which says, no, if I have many things in common with the animals, definitely Prakriti has given me something which these people don't have, the buddhi. The buddhi, which is a product of the sattva guna of Prakriti. So here, guna vaitrishnam. So that guna, even to have the sattvic attitude, it is so difficult. So it's so difficult because the body, the gunas or the prakriti has a tendency to draw us down. You see, even the tree, it may struggle to live for 100 years, but then slowly the it starts aging, and then it has a tendency. Tamas says, the earth says, you have had enough of life now. You come. I will mix you. You will be cut down. Maybe you will be burned, and you will be reduced to ashes. So also, maybe it has lived for 500 years, 600 years. The tree might have lived. But someday or the other, it is definitely not eternal. It gets reduced to tamas. It becomes so. The evolution in nature is because of the evolution of the gunas. So guna vaitrishnam means you have to go to higher and higher gunas so that you can transcend them and become one with the purusha. Purusha khater guna vaitrishnam. We have to first understand what the purusha, the self is, and what the gunas are, what are the qualities. According to yoga philosophy, Swamiji says, the whole universe, as I told you, are made of three gunas. They manifest in the physical world as darkness, or now you see Swamiji has given a different definition. When I told you what is tamas is, Swamiji gives darkness or inactivity. Now where do you see darkness? In the stones. You see inactivity there. So darkness means unable to see the light. When you see unable to see the light means unable to take the right decision. So that is a tamasic person. That person, if he is too dull, even to be active, then you can say his whole personality is tamasic. So you see stone, you see it doesn't grow. It just stays, it breaks down, disintegrates, but it doesn't grow. Or maybe if sediments are there, it may grow a little bit. But after all, a stone is a stone. So we call it tamasic. It is dark, and not dark, it is in the physical world, it is inactive. But attraction or repulsion, extreme attraction or extreme repulsion is the quality of rajas. Rajas has this characteristic. not darkness or inactivity, extreme attraction or extreme repulsion. That if I want money, I want to do this, I want to do that. So intense desire to create things for yourself, or intense desire even to destroy. You want to destroy, but when you destroy, the tendency takes you towards tamas. That's why they say tamasic people are destructive. They can't see any other people happy. I am unhappy, I'll make you unhappy. And they drag them down. The typical story is told about the Indian crab. They say, I don't know whether all crabs may be having the same nature. I don't think it is an Indian crab, but somebody has joked. And he said, some foreigner came and saw there was a lot of baskets with crabs to be exported. And they were surprised because all these crabs were in an open basket. There was no lid or no cover. Of course, they have to live. That's why they can't be sealed. So they kept it open so that they can survive till they reach the desired place. So some of the merchants said, why don't you close it? By the time you reach the destination, all the crabs will escape. So then that fisherman said, I know the crabs better than you. They are Indian crabs. I mean, it's just a joke. I think all crabs are the same. He said, they are crabs. You don't know. The moment the top person, or the person who is the crab which is at the top, tries to escape from the basket, the lower one will drag it down. It will just hang on to its leg. So each one is pulling the other and dragging it down. So that is the nature of tamas, inactivity. I am I have a tamasic characteristic, and anybody who comes in my vicinity has to be like me. I will destroy, you will also destroy. So that's how people, evil people, become friends of each other, and one tamasic person will influence another tamasic person. So when you come in contact with Rajasic, the opposite thing happens. He says, let us exert ourselves. Let us create a situation where we can be more creative. We can create more material, more wealth, more name and fame and all those things. So that is extreme attraction or repulsion. Repulsion also can be there. It's not just attraction. It may be some hatred, common hatred. So I said we will go and protest and fight that person because your hatred and my hatred put together. So it may be repulsive behavior or it may be attractive. Attraction, you are so attracted that you are so restless to acquire, that is rajas. And Swamiji says, finally, sattva means equilibrium of the two. Equilibrium of attraction and repulsion. You don't bother, your mind, chitta has taken the form of the buddhi. You just observe. Good things come, okay, fine, you don't get elated. You may think it's a very dull state where you don't get happy. But then what is better, if we evaluate, to be very happy and then we become very sorrowful. But a person who has maintained the sthita prajna or equilibrium state, he has a continuous joy. He doesn't become excessively happy at one time and excessively sorrowful, because that up and down will cause a lot of strain on the personality. So the equilibrium is a sattvic person. He is happy, but he is not overjoyed or doesn't express it. He just enjoys the bliss within. So whenever he is sorrowful, still he enjoys the bliss within because he is enjoying the bliss of equilibrium of sattva. So sattva is a quality, is a guna, which according to Prakriti takes you very near to the Purusha. So all in everything that is in nature is a combination of all the three forces. So nature has been divided into these three categories by the Sankhya philosophy, but the Purusha is beyond that. Guna Vaitrishna, you have to go beyond the gunas. They say something is better than nothing, at least become sattvic, but don't stop there. If you want to reach the effulgent, pure, perfect Brahman or Purusha, then you have to go beyond the gunas. So whatever of intelligence that we see in nature is but the reflection of that Purusha upon nature. When the reflection is more, you call it Buddhi. You see, the intelligent person doesn't fall into a trap, is never never caught by the tamas. He doesn't allow himself to be caught. He doesn't allow his freedom to be sacrificed. He can simply escape. As Thakur used to give the example, four types of fishes are there. One is the Nitya Mukta, who never gets trapped, who swims with joy of freedom in the ocean. It never comes even near the net. But some people, though they, some people simply come and get caught in the net and they don't even try to escape. They are the bound souls. They are happy with their bondage. They don't know that one day they will be taken out and killed. But there are some who fall into the net. They burn their fingers in the world, but they are wise enough. Said one time it's okay. One time experience is good enough. I don't want to experience again and again to get convinced that this worldly thing, this attachment or this attachment to the gunas will create havoc in my life. So one experience, once you burn your fingers, as they say in English, burning one's fingers. So once you burn your fingers, you are cautious. You don't go near the fire again. So that is how Swamiji says, whatever intelligence that you see in nature is the reflection of the Purusha. If if we through spiritual practice, if we manifest the more of Purusha, then our intellect allows us to not to fall into the trap like that fish. It just goes below and stays in that level, doesn't even come anywhere near the net. They are the Nitya Muktas according to Thakur. But there are some people who get caught but then just jump, knowing fully well that the last time I got caught in the last birth, I was cut and nice meal was made. So perhaps that memory is strong, so it will simply jump. So so yeah. So I think the time is almost over. I will keep the session open for some questions. So this we have to remember these three gunas. Swamiji says we'll continue from here next class next Friday. That though we think that Prakriti is insentient, just as stones, you have a tendency. We have a tendency to understand that you call this inanimate and animate objects. You may think the stone is inanimate, the tree is animate, but there is hardly any difference. Sankhya does not classify things like that. They say even inanimate objects are having cells, they are having atoms. So they also have energy, they also have prana. So you cannot say they are sentient or insentient. If you call that insentient, then the mind also is insentient. It is the stone is as insentient as the mind. Mind is also jada. That is what we have to get rid of, this lower mind, the reactive mind, because there is so much of tamas in that, so much of negativity in that, which drags us again and again down. So we have to be careful. So that is why Swamiji says, whatever little intelligence, the motivation to go up, to create to become one with the Purusha, that requires a higher kind of vairagya. So if there are some questions you can ask, I will open the chat. Okay, the first question Rajdeep is asking, could you kindly explain the seat of emotions in the Antakarana and how they are formed and the relation with prana? Okay, emotions are part of the reactive mind. What do you mean by reaction? It is an emotional reaction. So all the emotions, whether it is good, positive emotion or negative emotion. Positive emotion can help you to get rid of the negative emotion. That's the only good thing about it. And then you can make you emotionless. But the idea is to become emotionless, to have to live, to convert your chitta into buddhi. Buddhi is not emotional mind. You have to remember that. A person with buddhi is a calm and collected person. He doesn't show emotions. Emotions are only with the lower mind. So in the Antakarana, when you said what explain the seat of emotion, the seat is the manas and how they are formed. How they are formed means they are formed, as I told you, because of our reactions. They are formed because of our contact with seen, drishta, anushravika. That's what I explained just now. The whole talk today was based on that. Things that you see or things that you hear, these two things create some kind of emotion. It is raga or dvesha. If you see a dirty thing, you develop a distaste for that. That is dvesha. That is also an emotion. Hatred. If you see a good thing, it is raga. You want to get it. You want to eat it. You want to possess it. So raga and dvesha are two emotions, but they are in the reactive mind. So which emotion is good? That depends on the object. If the object is God, then the emotion, the emotion becomes purified, and that love for God, that love for objects is turned towards love for God, is converted into love for God. So that is how they are formed. So in both cases, objects are required, or somebody has to tell you. In the case of good emotions, what are the objects? The objects is the japa, the repetition of the name, the bhajans which you sing, or somebody, some good person coming and telling you the mantra. You have heard it. You have not seen Thakur, you have not seen Ramakrishna, or you have not seen Krishna or Rama. But your guru says you repeat this mantra, or the Shastra say you repeat it. When you repeat it, you may not have seen Krishna or Rama, but the vibrations of Krishna and Rama are created. So, this that strengthens the prana. So all emotions are not bad. Emotions, if they take you towards the gross, the reactive mind, it can be harmful. But if it takes you towards the subtle, they can create a positive uh, emotion, and that emotion will take you towards the non-reactive mind or buddhi. So slowly the repetition of the name, or through bhakti yoga, repetition of prayers and bhajans and all those things, you come to a stage where your emotions, which once upon a time used to disturb you a lot, the same, very same emotions, the same jealousy, you be jealous that others are advancing, I'm not advancing towards God. The same emotion of jealousy, don't be jealous if you don't get a small object, but be jealous that, oh, you see, they make so much spiritual progress. So Thakur used to say, you have to redirect the emotions which are basically not bad. Even anger, you be angry that you are not able to meditate, so that anger will make you put in more efforts to do japa and to do spiritual practices. So if you have anger, convert it, refine it, or sublimate it. So emotions are not bad. So seat of emotions are, though they are in the manas, they can be elevated. And how they are formed, I told you, and the relation with prana, that is very important, because the prana is to a large extent strengthened by positive emotions and weakened by negative emotions. The reason is simple. The negative emotions take you towards the gross. The prana expends itself, wastes itself in gross things. You see, every gross desire, to achieve that, you have to give up a little bit, not little, significant amount of prana. All the acts of pleasure, even eating. Suppose you want to of enjoy eating a very, very heavy meal. Do you understand? I mean, do you realize how much of prana is expended to digest it? A good dish, very, very nutritious dish, which you really don't require, so many calories are there, it expends calories to digest, and that prana is lost. So half your prana, they say, that's why fasting is given so much of importance. You are saving the prana. If 25% of the prana is spent in digesting food which you really don't need to survive, then that is wastage of prana. So these emotions, if they don't are not controlled, and if their emotions control us and make us behave and do acts which waste our bodily, physical as well as mental resources. It's not just the physical resources. when you undergo any sense enjoyment, whatever it is, whatever type it is, you have to pay a price. Your body has to pay a price. So naturally, the prana also has to pay a price. The prana will be weakened. So its relation with prana is very, very subtle and important. And we have to understand and realize how much of spare prana we have. So even before indulging in sense pleasures, we have to decide whether we really have the capacity or the prana. Otherwise, that lack of prana can result in our malfunction of our other activities. Our mind also, because mind also needs, manas also needs prana to support it. On one side, the body needs prana, and if the body wastes that prana in sense enjoyment, then very little is left for the mind, for the creative mind. So that is what. Now, Thakur says there are four kinds of fish, but you mentioned only three. I think I missed the fourth one. No, there is one. Thakur used to say one is ever free, the Nitya Mukta. Second, the last category is totally bound, Baddha Jeev. So Baddha Jeev is one who does not even try. But slightly higher is another Jiva who tries, and maybe one or two might succeed. And the fourth category is that which, as soon as it is caught, it immediately jumps and escapes. So one is trying to escape but is not able to escape. One category. Another is one who is able to escape after a lot of struggle. And the other one who doesn't even try, the totally baddha or bound soul, who doesn't even know what freedom is. He's satisfied with the animal existence he lives. He's satisfied if he just fulfills the function, biological functions which animals uh, do. They eat, they procreate, and then uh, that is how they breathe. They do all the common functions. We can easily evaluate what are the common functions which we share with animals. So that is the bound soul. The people who try, they may not succeed, but at least they try to go and have a higher life. And the next one is they try and somehow manage to escape the net. But Nitya Muktas are those who are never bound. So these are the four categories. Okay. Now, last question. Yeah. Would devotion like Swami Vivekananda's Guru Bhakti or Ramakrishna's Bhakti to Ma Kali also be defined as a vritti to be eliminated? No. No, it is a vritti which eliminates the lower vrittis. And they may not distract you from moksha, because those vrittis are so powerful that they take you towards moksha. The thing with most of us is to how to deal with the smaller and more disturbing vrittis. So those vrittis, Guru Bhakti or devotion, they are like huge waves which drown the smaller waves and finally take you to a period, to a place where there is no wave at all. It's total calmness. So that will never distract. Next, you mentioned Dagda Bija Avastha 2 classes back, but could you please describe the Japa, Dhyana and Seva leads to the state of mind in yoga? Could you also describe the karma leads Chitta Shuddhi from Advaitic perspective? See, it is not a question of Dvaita or Advaita. The mind is common. It's not that an Advaitin has a different theory of the mind and the Dvaitin has another theory of the mind. How he deals with his mind is important. So, karma leads to Chitta Shuddhi, whether it is from Advaitic perspective or from the Bhakti perspective, it is the same. So, Dagda Bija Avastha, I mentioned, is there are certain samskaras in our Karana Sharira. As I told you, Sula Sharira, Sukshma Sharira, which is our mind, the mental thoughts are very much visible and perceivable by us. But the seed form, the thoughts in seed form, they are known as bija. Just as you have a bija mantra, You have a bija thought in you. There are so many bijas you have stored in the Karana Sharira. They have the tendency to come and disturb you. You may realize why I am getting so many useless thoughts. I never thought of anything bad, but still these thoughts are coming. So that is the reason why we say Dagda Bija, means you burn those seeds. We don't know what seeds are there. Those seeds may cause havoc in your life, but you don't want to take the chance. You don't want the plant to grow. Let the plant grow. Let the seeds be there. I have so many samskaras. I will water it. The tree will become big. And if it is a harmful tree, I will cut it. No. The yogi says never, never, I'll never do that. Because once the tree grows, then it is difficult. Once the samskaras are pampered, as we don't train our children to do, very often we pamper them, and when they pamper and then you say, oh, he's not listening to me, because the tree has grown. You could not burn the seeds of the weeds. Good trees are good, but bad weeds are also growing. So Dagda Bija is meant to destroy the seeds at the root level. I mean, before it becomes a sapling or a tree. So that is japa dhyana seva leads to that state of mind. It definitely leads, because dagda bija avastha is burned. This burning can take place by japa, intense japa. What does japa do? It burns these seeds. That's why you don't realize the benefits of japa immediately. You will realize it because you are now burning the seeds. A lot of time people say that when I'm doing japa, I get all these bad thoughts. Yes, because the burning process is taking place there. But after a while you will find, where have those bad thoughts gone? I am a changed person, because lot of seeds have been burnt. Okay, so I take your leave. Om shanti shanti shanti. Hari Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.